we are so socially wired. But I just remember going, if I think back to when I was at school, and what did we have, like biology, geology, you get the three kind of subjects. And I never learned about my own brain that way. I didn't learn that, 4 out of the 5 processes going on in the background of our brain are always listening out for and processing our own kind of social standing and how we're showing up compared to others. Like, it's what our brain is preoccupied with all day. And so it non-consciously, it's influencing how we're moving through every day, how we're showing up, whether we compete or collaborate, a long-term focus or short-term focus, we'll share information or not, we'll trust or not. And we don't even realize it.
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way the game is played. This podcast helps purpose-driven leaders unlock their highest potential so that they can play their biggest impact game. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, changing the way this game is being played. We are back in the podcast studio. As you can tell from my background, I am not in my usual spot. I am in my happy place, and you know what that means. Right, ladies? What does it mean?
Means all cylinders firing for you today.
That's right. I always do my best work when I start my morning with my bare feet on Mother Earth. So I am definitely feeling the flow today. And I'm so fired up to introduce you to our guest, Jane Moran. She is coming from a very similar space and place as us here at the Leadership Launchpad Project. She is a brain-based executive coach with 25 experience in this game, 25 years of experience as a certified executive coach and behavior change expert. She has a proven track record for equipping senior leaders to drive agility, innovation, and high performance. We were talking a little bit off air in terms of some of the places and spaces that she likes to play. And you're going to see a ton of alignment showing up in this interview today. Jane, welcome to the podcast. It's so lovely to have you in studio.
Thank you. I've got to say, I love the setup there.
Right? Right? I'm sitting in my daughter's art studio right now, as you can tell. This is definitely where she likes to find her creative flow the most too. But yeah, Jane, let's get this party started and plug our audience into why I'm so fired up to introduce you today. Can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and the backstory in terms of your ascension towards becoming a leadership coach, a brain-based executive leadership coach?
Yeah. Well, so I guess first up, yes, I'm coming to you all today in beautiful Kelowna, BC, which I've moved here recently. So I'm just looking at my beautiful garden. There's some deer that came through before, so I'm kind of in my element here. I was born in England, grew up in Australia, been 20 years in Canada. Goodness, can't believe it. I'm a hockey mum. And I think it was around year 2000, because we were doing the whole Y2K thing, if anyone can remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Australia. Yeah, you remember that?
I do.
And I'd actually just in my 20s was because I speak Malay, and I used to go on government trade missions with the Australian government to Indonesia, and it got kind of dangerous after a while. And I was thinking, goodness, I was pregnant with my first son, and I thought I need to kind of do something safer. But what is it that I'm really passionate about, that I would leave a baby in daycare for part of the week because I love what I do. And back then, think about it, 25 years ago, I Googled help people be the best they can be, because that's one thing I knew I was pretty good at. And what came up in, I guess, Google at the time was coaching. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So, of course, as these things happen often with synchronicity, when things start to align and you're on your path, is I remember we were still getting newspapers delivered back then, and they'd throw them on the front garden. And I was going through the newspaper, and I saw what jumped out was like a little advertisement for neuroscience-based executive coaching. And David Rock, who I learned a lot from with the Neuro Leadership Institute in New York, ended up working alongside him. But he was doing a bit of a roadshow around Australia about the certification he offered. Long story short, I went and did the certification. I was working at Hewlett Packard back then. I was there for 11 years. And we ended up bringing in that methodology and rolled it across 15 countries. I got published in organizational business, international business and organizational excellence, whatever it says on my resume, something like that, in 2007. Because it was this, the language was a good fit for highly analytical, black and white thinkers who think, oh no, I don't want the soft stuff, give me the hard. And I thought, well, this is the hard science behind soft skills. And given we're socially wired, we do need to understand how we're wired so we can leverage the best of ourselves and others. So I went on to work for the Neuro Leadership Institute out of New York, then co-founded Noesis Learning with my business partner. And we then started, and we went back to school, and I did an executive master's in the neuroscience of leadership. We built our own curriculum and created a model for psychological safety, which was all social cognitive neuroscience based, and just had a lot of fun. Two moms, hockey mom, and Wendy had two daughters. I've got two grown sons. And we basically, out of Calgary at the time, spent a lot of time educating finance, energy, insurance, healthcare, all of our curriculum that we put together and tested it. And then went on to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Canada for 3 years, helping evolve their transformative leadership methodology. So I spend most of my time working with the US and in Canada, helping leaders be less transactional and more transformative. And it's my passion.
Well,
yeah,
I
so
definitely have a ton of questions, but I seem to be doing all the talking so far today. So if nobody else has any, I want to dig into some of what this methodology that you co-created with your partner entails. Yeah, obviously you got inspiration from the Neuro Leadership Institute, I think you said. But where did you take your own process after having that initial launch pad with somebody that was doing such game-changing work across the globe?
So I guess what's really been the core of my fascination is the fact that we are so socially wired. But I just remember going, if I think back to when I was at school, and what did we have, like biology, geology, you get the three kind of subjects. And I never learned about my own brain that way. I didn't learn that, 4 out of the 5 processes going on in the background of our brain are always listening out for and processing our own kind of social standing and how we're showing up compared to others. Like, it's what our brain is preoccupied with all day. And so it non-consciously, it's influencing how we're moving through every day, how we're showing up, whether we compete or collaborate, a long-term focus or short-term focus, we'll share information or not, we'll trust or not. And we don't even realize it. And so the research I did and the focus of my programming and work has been on how to set leaders up to take care of their own needs for psychological safety, for optimum use of imagination. So the future programming of setting that course of direction for where we want to go, and being less influenced by the programming that got us here. Then we know nothing changes. So it's very much social cognitive neuroscience based, which sounds highly theoretical, but it's actually very, very practical and simple to apply. Which again is, I think leaders, they're so overwhelmed. They don't want heavy. Don't make me watch anything long or have to read too many things because we're so maxed out at the end of a back-to-back day. But please give me some tried and tested practical tools that will make a difference. So my sweet spot, I think, is distilling the science down. I'm a lover of wine, so I often use the wine analogy, distilling it all down into very practical tools.
Well, it's so interesting. It sounds like what you're talking about is once you give people the awareness of those patterns that are hardwired in our brain that we're, all not normally aware of, because as you say, we're not taught this, that then you kind of give them, well, this is very similar to what we do. We call it, now we apply the intelligence, which is where when you have that awareness, then, you know, you're able to obviously use that as a resource to impact, you know, your choices in a different way and steer your behavior in a different way.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed too is, so we do leadership training with leaders, and I am amazed actually, just how many people, one of the biggest things that they say is that the awareness piece is the big breakthrough
It
for them,
is.
because nobody tells us
Yeah.
that this is happening. I mean, is that something that you feel has been a theme, as you've obviously had so many years of experience, like that when you're coaching people, are they surprised to hear that this is all going on without their awareness? Or do you find that some people are actually have, you know, read it somewhere or
Yeah.
been taught it?
I'm so glad you raised that. So awareness is everything, like it's the starting point. But I think even self-awareness has a woo-woo connotation
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
to it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
a nice to have
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, some people spend time on, but hey, I'm too busy for that. But it's like we can't change anything that we're not aware of in the first place. And I think because of our back-to-back days these days, thanks to COVID and digitization, we've just gone missing in action. So we don't even know who we are or what we like or what our tendencies are and what our inclinations are. So I have leaders often, again, using the science to kind of almost validate that this is so critical. It's the first door we open, and to get them to kind of soak in and marinate in, and to, it's like in a car, I think, go into neutral for a while. They just want to speed off and, you know, results, actions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, spend some time here first. I promise you'll end up going faster in the end and get to where you want to get. So self-awareness is everything. So I use some tools just to help leaders bump into some of that for themselves. And it requires, as we know, as coaches, all of our skills around, this is where we're practicing what we preach, creating that container, that safety, because of the intimacy that's required to have such a kind of powerful conversation. It accelerates everything, doesn't it?
Sometimes when we're in these high pressure, high stakes conditions, we do tend to armor up, right? Because we have these protector parts in our personality that are designed for keeping us safe when there's ripe levels of uncertainty.
Oh, 100%. One of the things that I wanted to dig in with you on, there's tons of stuff, obviously, but you've mentioned psychological safety. I want to know from your perspective, like, how can leaders truly foster psychological safety without it becoming a bit of a corporate buzzword? Because that's sort
Mm-hmm.
of what I'm feeling and hearing right now. You can hear
Yeah.
it across a number of industries, but how can they truly foster it?
Yeah, great question. And I'm just going to make a note here because, yes, I'm seeing some of the trends there too, Shelley. Um, like anything that's a bit of a breakthrough and we get a new label and it anchors things in, there can be a tendency to let's sprinkle it everywhere. Let's just talk about it. And then that means check done, we got
Correct.
it.
Yeah.
And actually
Mm-hmm.
saying that, oh, we have psychological safety when the work hasn't been done actually has the opposite effect. That will make things worse. So psychological safety, I did was on faculty at Google for a while, I think around 2007, after Amy Edmondson's research-based neuroscience, the conversation skills training. So I went and did an audit and then was invited to be one of the facilitators. So I do draw on the research she did with Harvard and at Google, um, because it is research based. But in a nutshell, if you think about what the definition is, which again, people will come up with a whole variety of permutations of even what it is. So it's all about creating a certainty and assurance that someone can show up without any kind of negative repercussion or consequence to pushing back, challenging, debating, um, and being authentic in an honest perspective. And how to foster it is, first of all, just recognizing what makes up, what do we need to feel safe? Because of course, if we don't feel safe, if a leader doesn't feel safe and they're kind of charging through each day in threat state, we know the ripple effect that has. We know when we come across someone like that and how we disengage, pull away, retreat, don't do our best work. So it does start again with self-awareness. So figuring out what are my core needs for psychological safety. And we all have different needs. Some people have a high need for certainty and assurance. We want detail, structure, clarity, lots of information. Some people it's more status related. Let me know what I'm doing right. Give me an opportunity to feel like I'm progressing onwards and upwards or learning new skills. With others, it's around perception of equitable exchange and fairness and inclusivity. With some people like me, my primary need is all around autonomy and independent thinking. So here we are, entrepreneurs. We like to create, influence, have a voice, collaborate. So once it does start with self, what it is, to what extent am I transmitting that all is safe and you can lean in towards me and trust me, and then let's go at understanding what it is individually my people need to feel safe, and then collectively. And this is where authenticity is so powerful. And we think about the biology of belief, and to what extent is what I'm transmitting in coherence with what I'm saying. So then we get into the whole systems thinking approach, which is a
I
whole
love that.
other space we could go to.
I love that because it's no, I feel like it's starting to become that checkbox where it's like, okay, we're aware of what trust and psychological safety is, but it's the actual implementation. And I think like you nailed it on the head, is that it's not a one size fits all for every single individual. You have to tailor the approach depending on the want and the need of the person that you're leading.
Most definitely, most definitely. And it's so liberating and empowering for individuals to work on a team and feel that their leader understands that and gets that. And I would say to leaders, it won't cost you anything apart from just catching yourself and purposefully entering into the conversation, seeking a number of things that maybe you're not typically thinking about. But wow, what an impact it can have, as I'm sure you know, doing the work you do together on team performance.
So interesting because we get so much pushback on the fact that we start with the entry point in our interventions known as self-leadership, and when we're in these leadership locker rooms developing these leaders, they always look at us sideways like, I thought I was here to learn about how to lead other people. Like we still in 2025 has such a disconnect in terms of what has the biggest influence when you're leading other people is how you lead yourself. I'm curious because we're talking about authenticity now, and I know you're as passionate about this subject as we are, working with a bunch of high achiever leaders, especially. You were in-house at some of the highest pressure, high stakes conditions, corporately speaking. So you must have received the same amount of pushback that we do in terms of trying to challenge leaders to get into their authenticity. That is such a hard thing for high achievers to trust, isn't it?
It is. And I think I have a thing for semantics, for language. We have to get the language right. And I think the neuroscience is useful because it's a bit of a Trojan horse. We can get it through the gates because it doesn't sound too fluffy. So yes, that how to get leaders to not only make friends with authenticity, but to kind of take it seriously and spend some time on it. So sometimes I do little experiments and I think, okay, but what if I called it courage? Because if we are truly authentic, we're more likely to be courageous because we're truly standing in something we really believe in. And that's a different set of brain chemistry. And then the influence and impact we have and the pull and the following that will generate is so much larger. Now, they all want that. They'll all put their hand up, they want that. But authenticity, nah, don't really have time for that. So it's interesting. So I think it's about getting the language right and getting them to notice, can you see what you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes the authenticity is also one of those buzzwords that has been thrown around, and especially in certain arenas. Like I think people don't necessarily know for sure what authenticity actually means for them.
Yes.
I know that when I first came across it, when I got into the coaching space, I I didn't know what it really meant either. I just thought, oh, like, but isn't everybody authentic? Like, I didn't get that,
Switched.
there was layers of conditioning. It's, as you say, it's attached to, that social programming that we all have. And the more that you're caught in, fear around revealing, let's say, weaknesses or areas of growth, or whatever it, vulnerabilities, whatever it is, the less authentic you're going to be, because we always use Brene Brown's languaging around armoring up, and armored leadership, and as
Yes.
opposed to that more human centric thing. So I think maybe that's how we segue into it when you say, Shelley and Susan, is we do pull a lot of the Brene Brown stuff into the way that we describe it to people.
Yeah.
And the IFS I was talking to you about on
Oh,
our little
yes.
call there last week, Jane, the systems thinking approach to
Mhm.
understanding how we lead ourselves in our self-leadership. And that sometimes when we're in these high pressure, high stakes conditions, we do tend to armor up, right? Because we have these protector parts in our personality that are designed for keeping us safe when there's ripe levels of uncertainty. I feel like this is where we want to go with you next, though, because we're having so many conversations in our locker rooms right now in regards to how much uncertainty is in the ethers, or how much uncertainty is within these corporate environments right now, right? With the state of the economy and what's going on geopolitically. So let's get into some brain-based executive coaching now, just in terms of, like, how can a leader really double down on leading with authenticity and integrity when up against so much uncertainty in the world?
Yeah. Well, I hate to use common cliches. However, we've heard, is it Sinek? I don't know, but
Simon Sinek, yeah.
it does start with why. So really getting clear around, so okay, I'll take a step back. So there is so much uncertainty. Yes, our brains hate certainty, as uncertainty, as you know. It's always going to, you prefer the same old ways of thinking. It's metabolically cheaper, less expensive. And because there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity and unpredictability, complexity, we have this tendency now of just hunkering down into the same, what is certain. So known ways, established protocols, same routines, because even though it's not optimum, there's still some delicious comfort brain-wise to doing the same thing every day. So so how do we disrupt that pattern? Well, trying to find something else that we are certain about. So that's why coming up with the compelling vision or thing that's worth shooting for. So this is why this excavation around self is so important. Like, what are you willing to let go of the side for? And really, and that takes a bit of time to think about. They're not being asked the kind of questions that we're asking them. And it can be really irritating. I'm sure you've had some of the pushback at times.
That's why I'm asking.
They don't just have an answer. And
Yeah.
then we make it okay. Of course you don't, because when was the last time you were asked this question? A decade? Maybe never. So it does start with figuring out what is that compelling or radical ambition that you want the next 10 years, or you want your legacy to be about, that truly revs your engine, lights up your circuitry, and then gets you watching that little, when it's that default mode network, isn't it, in our brain, in between attending to tasks, which again we don't do if we're going back to back to back to back. There is no in between anything anymore, and we need that space to let our brain run that little trailer movie that has all those clues as to ultimately what success, what our ultimate thriving looks like. So I really encourage leaders to step away, because it's not more time we need, it's space. Space to think, space to reflect, watch that little trailer movie, capture the clues, and then let's put together the scene by scene. What is the story about you going out there and enrolling people behind that vision? Then they'll let go of the side, because then they realize, of course, they're not alone in this. It is a team sport these days. It has to be, doesn't it, leadership?
Just to touch on that, but on the flip side, but more so on, I guess, like the corporate perspective, because I'm dying to understand what you think. Like you've led massive, change strategies for huge organizations. What do you think companies get wrong when trying to create organizational change? Like, where do you think they miss the mark?
Number one thing is they carve out of the budget the people side of change. They think, okay, I'm going to spend, yes, X million dollars on this ERP implementation. Let's get the latest and greatest tools. Let's get the upgraded version. And of course, what they take out of the budget then is all of the human side of how they're going to make sure that people will use it, feel certain enough to let go of tools that maybe have put them in high status as the go-to person. And when you understand the neuroscience of human behavior, we can say, oh, that's why they're still holding on to those old legacy tools, because they're seen as in a position of power and influence. And we're actually saying no, and we know now through the science how important that is. Your brain will keep you holding onto that security blanket en masse unless we work with people to adopt and show humility as leaders to let people know it's okay to, because it feels uncomfortable to learn new things. And we're not modeling, we're not telling leaders that it's okay to be human, and we need you to model the discomfort of letting go of the familiar and starting to use the new. So a lot of these large transformations will fail because there is a lack of spend on the uptake of them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And on that note, sorry, ladies, I know that you guys have a
No,
lot
go,
of questions
go.
as well, but on that, what do you think, if from your perspective, the one leadership behavior that should be retired for good? And what should
What
replace
to
it
do?
potentially?
Tell me
All of
what
them,
to
like
do.
where do
Must
you,
she pick just one?
Yes. Well, I
but
mean, it
what's the
depends.
one?
Just one. Okay. No, because sometimes, we need some guidance as to, is it this tool, is it that tool, is it this way or that way? The worst damage is I've seen is in criticism. So we're wired to jump on when something's wrong. It's a survival mechanism in our brain. And some of us more than others will jump on people because it's an irresistible urge for some leaders to let someone know when they got it wrong. Now, the problem with that is there's a much more, well, first of all, there's the social shaming and perception of drop in status for that individual, which actually triggers the pain circuitry in their brain. So I don't know how much work you get done if you have a migraine or a toothache. For me, it's not much. So then you've got people actually doing less work in less preferred ways because they've got a leader who is giving them a hit to their status. So where I'm going with this is we can still raise people's awareness. Here we go, there's the word again, of preferred ways of doing things, but to engage with them in a way that doesn't shame or blame. So drawing attention, for example, to when they do get it right, or listening to them. Often they know exactly when they've got something wrong. Just give them an opportunity to share it and then acknowledge the fact that they have that self-awareness, and then offer with permission. Of course, we know we don't have to use actually the word, but offer a preferred way or something that's been successful for them in the past, and people will pick that up and run with it. So it's just the way that we give feedback. Even the word feedback, people run for the hills because our brains don't like conflict, because it might have, meant a drop down in the tribal food chain thousands of years ago. So our brains, we're still running with this ancient circuitry. So yes, positive reinforcement, drawing attention to the behavior we want to see more of, rather than drawing attention to the behavior we want to see less of. Far higher efficacy if we do it that way.
Absolutely love that and agree 100%. Love it. All right, sorry, ladies.
I feel like where I want to land the plane today is like this kind of through line of self-awareness that we've been talking so much about. We call this the mother of all skills, not soft skills. This is a hard one to build. This is one of the hardest ones to build. In fact, what is it? Tasha Eurich says 95% of us out there think we're highly self-aware, when it turns out only about 12% of us actually are. This is why we call it brain training and getting in the mental gym, in fact, in terms of really starting to crank up themes in our consciousness. But I know you and I were riffing a little bit in and around some of what we see coming in terms of what the needs are going to be as we start to imagine on the hilltop and horizon. And I think we're both feeling this call pretty heavily right now. Really, the call is going to be to become more conscious leaders, period. You know, whether we're going through AI in terms of how disruptive that transformative process is going to be for our working world, or it's these new generations that are coming up behind our shoulder that require a much higher level of consciousness. We're all parents in the room talking about this stuff off the mic, right? Like this next generation isn't going to engage with us as leaders unless we come to the table consciously self-aware. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of some of your predictions there in terms of our evolution into becoming conscious leaders.
Yes, that's an exciting topic. So I
Isn't
spent,
it? I could talk about this one for a whole other show.
yeah, wouldn't that be great? Yeah, so I joke around with my husband that I have this like other life where I'm listening to podcasts, and it's the most delicious sidekick that I have where I follow different podcasts and do a lot of research and reading about the evolution and the research into consciousness and how do we tap into it? What is it? Where does it reside? And goodness, quantum physics and the whole thing, I think, is just going to completely open up. And we're seeing it already. I find Silicon Valley often is where and probably Scandinavia, also Australia. Have spent a lot of time in Australia, and I find there's certain epicenters of openness to maybe greater experimentation with some of these kind of leading edge new, what has been in the past maybe called new age thinking, but now there's science behind a lot of these findings. And it's kind of unpopular findings because of course it then tends to challenge a lot of mainstream science. It's a status hit for some of the, so I mean, I don't even need to go there, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
So when I studied about the brain, I never got a straight answer as to where consciousness actually resides. There were theories only, and research is increasingly pointing to our brain is more like a Wi-Fi, like a router tapping into consciousness.
I've read that. Last I saw, there was something about these tubules or something somewhere in the brain that they think that is, you're exactly right though. Yeah.
Receptors that download energy, right? And frequency.
Yeah. So thank you for that word. So Susan, yes, it's more about energy, managing energy than time. We only have so much time. And that time is another thing we could get into, the perception of what is time. We won't do that. But so here I am living in Cologne, a beautiful wine country, BC. And I do notice often, and you can tell it's like someone who's maybe in a corporate kind of role, they're all plugged in and they're doing these walking meetings. You can hear them talking out loud. And there is a huge movement to stepping away from, we do not have insights, we do not have breakthroughs in our thinking in front of the spreadsheet. Like none of us do. It's when we're walking through the garden, driving, going for a walk, walking the dog on the golf course. It's away from the screen. And so it's about how do we have that quieter brain and how do we make it more a legitimate practice? If we need our leaders to come up with solve problems that we've not had before because the world is going through what it is, it's not going to be using old patterns of thinking and old programming. We need to legitimize and validate and encourage the stepping away from the creating space and tapping into our imagination circuitry. That is what we're going to see more of. And even some of the drugs now that we're trying to get back into, hey, this can be useful in therapy, it can be useful in innovation. There's going to be a lot of big shifts out there. And so,
yes.
Yeah, I'm really curious, and there's lots to be read and researched and listened to out there, all with research backing.
Yeah, that's my favorite part. You know, it's taken us so long to finally get the data and the proof and the evidence, but now we can, as brain-based executive
Yes.
coaches, we can finally make a case for this whole
Yeah.
consciousness thing. And I totally agree. I think in terms of where humans are going to be most useful in the new world of technology,
Yes.
this is predicted to be a bigger disruption than the arrival of the internet, you know. But when you really come home to what a human being has that AI doesn't, it
Yes.
is this creative capacity, right? It is our ability to empathize with one another and collaborate and yeah, get co-creative in
Yes.
terms of how we
Yes.
want to show up in
Yeah.
this new working world, right?
Yeah.
I feel
Mhm.
like we could talk about this topic for days. In fact, I might have you back to talk about this exact topic at some point down the line. But until then, Jane, this has been fantastic. Can you please plug our audience into where you would like them to find you if anybody's curious to keep that conversation going with you on the sidelines?
Well, they can always ping me on LinkedIn. Inspiring Wiring is my company. And you will find me there, jane@inspiringwiring.com, if you want a conversation as to how we may be able to create more of a better place for us all to be living and working. But I'd love to connect again. Thank you, Susan. Thanks, ladies.
Great to
Thank you,
have you.
Jane.
Hey,
Yeah,
Jen. Awesome.
we'll make sure we put all of that in the show notes in case you didn't catch that in terms of what Jane was throwing down. But I definitely know that our people are going to want to be able to find you. Ladies, do you have any final thoughts on this whole consciousness thing or anything else that we talked about in today's episode?
I am dying to know, sorry, Leanne, I'm dying to know, Jane, if you could instill one leadership behavior into all of the future leaders, what would the one behavior be?
Mm.
If you want people to be goal aligned or more strategic and less tactical, share a vision, share a compelling vision, why it's important to you, and then give people permission to, yes, create their own goals for themselves that define their piece of the bigger puzzle. Don't give people your goals. Let them create their own and inspire them to do so. And that will be a catalyst for everyone being strategic and aligned.
Wonderful.
Promise, but
I
Amazing.
love that.
I do too.
Ian?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to quickly just end on a little anecdote here where we're talking about conscious leadership. And I know, Jane, you said, this is the way of the future. And of course, Susan, you say it every time as well. And I always think of it in the terms of large corporate settings. But just the other day, I have a conversation with a friend who runs a hair salon, and he said, he had had so many experiences over his decades of working in the business of very unconscious leadership. People who he said have not done the work and instead they take it out on their staff and their leadership is terrible. And he said, even within the salon environment, you just cannot keep employees the younger generation that they need to come in and do all the jobs. He said we can't keep them unless we're good leaders. And so
yes,
I thought, wow, that really hit me, because I thought even in small business, right, like where turnover is typically high, all of these leadership principles that we're talking about around becoming
yes,
more conscious leaders still
yes,
very much apply. So
yes.
if people aren't convinced yet, there's
Yeah,
another antidote that we're hitting you over the head with here.
Yeah, it's so
yeah. Continuing to make that case as we love to
Yeah.
do on this show. We say changing the way this game is being played. That's right, folks. This is how we're going to change the way this game is being played. It's through conscious collaboration, like you saw go down today in studio. Nothing is more inspiring to me than conversations like these this day and age. And so, on a final note, we are actually in a year of co-creation with our audience. And so, as a reminder, you are the why behind all of this for us. We'd love to hear your feedback in terms of whether or not this whole consciousness theme is something you'd like to hear more about. I feel like my antenna are downloading some frequencies in and around the conversations I'm having in the trenches with the leaders that I work with, the leadership teams that we serve. So, but I would love to hear from our audience if I am in fact downloading that correctly. For all other inquiries around this amazing brain-based executive coaching that we do here at Team Elite, go on over to the website, elitehighperformance.com. You can find all our leadership locker room programs over there as well. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in, hitting like and subscribe, and sharing this with a friend. Please help us share and spread this powerful ripple effect from this game-changing conversation today. We greatly appreciate you all, and we'll see you all back here next week.
Thank you.